Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Phoenixville Public Library, those of you in our community room and out there on Zoom. To our program, and kind of anticipation of the America 250 celebrations we're going to have next year. And this is the first of a number of programs focusing on the Revolutionary War that Phoenixville Library is going to have from now until next July. We're pleased to welcome back Valley Forge National Historical Park Guide Russell Brindley, who is also a Phoenixville Library patron. Yay! And his program tonight on military encampments of the Continental Army. Folks on Zoom, please stay muted through the presentation and hold all questions until the end. All right, Russell, welcome and take it away.
Right. Thank you, Mark. I want to thank all of you folks for joining in person and online, taking time out of your busy lives and busy schedules to listen to me ramble for about 45 minutes with about 15 minutes for questions and answers. I see some friendly faces in here that have listened to me pontificate before, so much appreciate coming back for some of you folks, and welcome to all of you. So what I'm going to talk to you today about is the different military encampments, or as they like to say, cantonments, during the American Revolution. There were 8 of them, 8 different winter encampments for the American Revolution. There it is. And this presentation is going to tell you what they did every single day for all those 8 winter encampments. It's going to be the highlights, the big themes of those encampments. And I hope that you get at the end of this, without these encampments, there will be no successful American Revolution. So we're going to start with Cambridge, Massachusetts, work our way down to Morristown, Valley Forge, where I work at, not too far from here, Middlebrook, New Jersey, Morristown again, New Windsor, New York, Newburgh, New York, and finally New Windsor, New York again. So we'll start with Cambridge, Massachusetts, July 2nd, 1775 to March 17th, 1776. I call it the inception or the creation of the Continental Army. Now you have to remember, this is July of 75. What happened before that? Lexington and Concord in April of 1775. Battle of Bunker Hill or Breed's Hill happened in June of 75. In July, all of these local militias are gathering and trying to figure out what the British Army is doing in Boston. And you can see here with this map on your screen and in front of you folks today. This is a historic map from the Library of Congress showing those different Continental forces, or eventually Continental forces, bottling up the British in Boston. Boston is a lot different today than what it was in the 1700s. It was connected with a tiny little peninsula. They called it the Neck. And now it's all mostly filled in, connecting to the mainland very easily. But back then, really only one way in, one way out. So George Washington, he is going to be appointed Commander-in-Chief of these forces by an act of Congress on June 15th of 1775, and eventually he will arrive in Cambridge on July 2nd. So that's why I say officially the encampment under Washington's leadership starts then. And he will stay in this lovely building that you can visit on the screen on your right-hand side there, Washington's headquarters. And today it is called the Longfellow House / Washington's Headquarters National Historical Site. The famous Longfellow family you might be familiar with bought the property decades later and lived in it for at least 50 years. And now it is run by the National Park Service that I work for today. Highly recommend visiting that beautiful home and the story there. So George Washington is going to stay there in Cambridge, not too far away from Harbor Square if you're familiar with that area. Throughout the encampment of Cambridge, Washington is promised 20,000 soldiers at his disposal to go toe-to-toe with the British Army of about 12,000 to 16,000 soldiers in Boston. In reality, Washington only has about 14,000 soldiers. That means they have the shoes, the clothes, they are ready to fight, and they are not ill and walking off the job. However, Washington doesn't really think those are going to be reliable soldiers. He calls them boys and deserters. So he has to do a lot of work with his officers and his generals that he's working with to make these guys a fighting force to drive the British out of Boston. And what they're going to do is they're going to use a lot of buildings in and around Cambridge, in and around Boston for those folks. This image here on your left on the screen is Cambridge Commons. So, Harbor Square, where Harvard University is. Numerous other buildings are there, and the one at the very top left there, it has a little flagpole there. That is a barracks that they constructed to house hundreds of Continental soldiers. They're going to need a lot more of them, but that's just one example of showing you Cambridge University, Harvard Square, and the Continental Army right there during the American Revolution. Guard houses. Over 61 guard houses are constructed in and around Boston to try to keep the British in check. Numerous armor shops, stables, other barracks for all these people. So again, they're building the apparatus as they are sieging the British in Boston. In addition to that, Washington's going to have his soldiers clustered in certain areas. I am going to go back real quick here. If I can, there it is. And as you kind of look at the map here, you see kind of these dotted lines here on the map west of Boston. Those are the 4 locations that those soldiers are going to be clustered. They are very clustered near Cambridge. So again, I'm calling it the Cambridge Encampment, but there were soldiers in Prospect Hill and Winter Hill, which aren't too far from Cambridge, which is right over there. And then Roxbury, which is just south of Boston. Again, right on the neck there. So again, Washington has these guys clustered in those areas for the topography, and he needs the space for all of these folks. So, while that's going on, you have to remember, and I'm going to go now back to the other slide here, the American Revolution isn't just happening in Boston, in Massachusetts. It's expanding to all of those 13 colonies and other places like Canada. So, Washington is going to meet in his headquarters General Benedict Arnold. You might be familiar with him for one reason or another. At this time, he is part of the Continental Forces, and he is asking George Washington, because remember, George Washington's at the top of the pyramid, in charge of everybody, and Benedict Arnold's going to be in the middle, for permission to raise forces to do a second-prong invasion of Canada, a second front that the American forces want to do to make sure that Canada becomes the 14th state in our new republic that we are creating. Washington agrees with the idea, thinks it's a really good idea, and he allows Benedict Arnold to recruit 1,000 soldiers from those forces that are sieging the British in and around Boston. So that's a big commitment, and they will make their way up to Quebec, and we will find out on another time if they are successful. Now, with that being said, there is a smallpox epidemic that is spreading from Boston down to the south and all the way out to Alaska. And it will kill hundreds of thousands of people. Americans, British, indigenous peoples, you name it, all over what is North America of the time period. And it's festering in Boston. There are reports that the population is very sickly in Boston. 10 to 30 funerals a day. Ooh. Washington knew from past experience that smallpox would be highly dangerous if it gained a foothold in his very crowded encampments. And so what Washington starts to do is he orders the medical department, these are the doctors in the Continental Army, to start inoculating thousands of soldiers. He will not inoculate everybody at once, because if you do that, you're going to be out of commission for about a month. And if the British find out about it, they will cross that little neck of Boston and attack all of you in a hospital bed, and the revolution will be over. So he pulls strategic brigades and soldiers at a time to do this during the time Washington is sieging the British in Boston. Now I am going to go back again, real quick here. It's back to that map for you folks of Boston, because I think it's important. Washington, again, he controls the countryside around Boston, but he doesn't control the harbor. Who controls the harbor? The British Navy. And they have a lot of cannons on their warships. Washington and his forces have very few cannons that can siege and attack Boston directly. So what Washington is going to need to do is he's going to need to get cannons. And luckily for him, remember that war is expanded, there was a fort in Lake Champlain called Fort Ticonderoga that had dozens of cannons that the British left there with a very small force that were captured months before. So he's got the cannons, but he needs to get them. That's 300 miles away from Boston. So he's going to order a local boy named Henry Knox. He was a bookseller before the American Revolution, who's now in charge of all the artillery, the cannons, to go get those and bring them back to Washington's forces in and around Cambridge, Massachusetts. It takes Henry Knox 56 days, 300 miles in total, over 1,200 soldiers, so that's a big commitment to go get these cannons. And they have 360 ox carts full of the equipment that they are pulling to eventually go towards Dorchester Heights, which is the peninsula directly south on the map there where the red circle, where those red dots are, that's Boston. Directly south of that is Dorchester Heights. It's a giant bluff that overlooks Boston today and back then. So let's see if I can show you. There it is, a famous painting made much later, but again showing you that commitment of pulling these cannons on sleds with oxen and soldiers guarding that to make sure they get back to Boston to attack the British, and they do. Eventually, they start putting these up on, like I said, Dorchester Heights. This is an image from the National Park Service. And fortifications are being constructed. They are doing these in the middle of the night. The reason why they have to do these in the middle of the night is because if the British find out about it, they will attack, and this might be another Bunker Hill or Breed's Hill, where the British control the hill and the Americans are driven back, and they might lose all those cannons that they started putting up there, and they might not get any more. So they're doing this secretly in the night, and they're doing it around March 4th and 5th of 1776, and they're pretty successful at getting these cannons up there. The British find out about it the following day, and they have to scramble. So what the British decide to do is, we will attack that before they get very well dug in. And the British get their soldiers on ships. They're sailing across the harbor from Boston, and there's a storm. And the weather is atrocious for the British forces. They can't get off their boats. They feel they're going to be sitting ducks by Washington's soldiers and their cannons. And so they abort the mission and go back to Boston. The British commander is General William Howe, the same commander who attacked the other heights in the distance there of that image, Bunker Hill. And he lost half of his soldiers in that battle, or skirmish, if you will. So he decides this is a bad idea. So what the British decide to do is pack up. And they will evacuate Boston on the 17th. They will march on this long wharf. Think of it as a giant pier. And they get on this giant pier, they get on their boats, and they sail back to Halifax, Nova Scotia, and parts of England. A lot of people think, oh, war's over, we've driven the British out of Boston, great. No, no, no. A lot of people, including George Washington and his generals, thinking, no, they're going to regroup, and they're going to come back, because they're getting strong intelligence that the British are attempting and thinking of, which they will, spoiler alert, to attack New York City. And so what Washington decides to do is send a very small detachment of soldiers to reoccupy Boston, some of those soldiers that were inoculated of smallpox, to see the ruins that the British left behind, because numerous buildings are burnt down, buildings are ransacked, supplies are left, including cannons that the British can't put on their boats quick enough, and very sickly people that are left in Boston that don't get on the British warships and leave. And so those guys kind of bring back law and order to the city of Boston as the British evacuate in March of 1776. So what Washington does with the rest of his army is he skedaddles out of Boston in the Cambridge area and marches them to New York City, and they set up fortifications and defenses and earthworks, just like that image there, in and around New York City, waiting for the British to attack. Oh, and they do. The British attack, for you in the timeline here, in this late summer, early fall of 1776. And they are pretty successful. They pretty much annihilate George Washington's army. And his army is getting pushed out of New York City, races across New Jersey, getting chased by the British. They are dissolving right before his eyes. Washington has only a couple thousand guys, crosses the Delaware River, encamps around Newtown, which is in South Bucks County. And Washington is pleading with all of you as soldiers, saying to stay on a little bit longer, stay on a little bit longer. This is December of 76. I'm sorry, 76 in the timeline. And those guys say, sure, but not all. And he does the famous crossing and the 10 miraculous days, the Battle of Trenton, Battle of Princeton. And they drive out British forces out of those locations. And eventually, those tired but victorious soldiers will march into our second encampment for this evening, Morristown, New Jersey, on January 6th, 1777 to May of that year. And I call it Rebuilding the Army. And so I have a lovely quote there from James Mitchell, and he's writing about the community of Morristown. He's saying that they're very hospitable, that they're Presbyterians, and they're very agreeable. Because again, some of these people, if you're from the Anglican Church, are going to be more loyal to the crown than some of these other religions are. And this is an image of Morristown from Robert Erskine. That was Washington's map maker during the American Revolution from Ringwood, New Jersey, northern New Jersey. And you can see the Morristown green kind of over on the left of the word Morristown there. And the little brown dots there represent buildings for you folks. Morristown, with 5,000 people showing up, they only have about 250 people living there. They're a very small community, unlike today. And again, few buildings clustered around the green, and a lot of them cluster around this building, Arnold's Tavern. Arnold's Tavern will serve as Washington's headquarters during the time he's in Morristown. The building doesn't exist today anymore. It was burnt down in the late 1800s. There's a marker for where it once was. Morristown had a lot of forest nearby that they could use for building huts, firewood, and there were mines and furnaces to the north that produced a lot of ammunition for the Continental forces. So Morristown was key to the Continental Army. That's why Washington picks that area. Now, with that being said, where are all the soldiers going to stay? Well, if I go back real quick on the slide here, don't look at that one yet, is they actually stay in the town itself. They don't build log huts like they did in Cambridge. They actually stay in all of your homes today. And so what happens is these soldiers, unfortunately, bring disease. Smallpox. Remember I talked about smallpox spreading in New England? Now it's shifting down towards the Mid-Atlantic area of New Jersey and Pennsylvania and New York State. And so that disease is spreading and wreaking havoc on these 5,000 soldiers. Because a lot of these guys are new recruits that haven't been inoculated by smallpox before. Because Washington had about 20,000 guys. They pretty much got killed, captured, or walked off the job during the New York campaign. So these are new people for the most part. Some of them will be inoculated, but a lot of them are new people. So he's writing to Dr. William Shippen. He's in charge of the medical department in the Continental Army. I read a quote here. He says, finding that smallpox is spreading and fearing that no precaution can prevent it from running through the whole army, I have determined the troops shall be inoculated. And again, they're inoculating the civilians as well in the town. That's the only time this will happen that I'm aware of during the American Revolution. The soldiers and the civilians are being inoculated of a disease. Dr. Nathaniel Bond, in part of the medical department under Washington's leadership, will be the one inoculating all of these folks with his doctors. As the weather starts to improve, more people are joining Washington's army because the British have not done the knockout blow to destroy this revolution, so people are getting excited again to join the cause. And eventually, Washington and his army will leave Morristown, like I said, in May of 1777 and go into the central New Jersey Valley, where I'm originally from, to start a new campaign and contest the British Army, who is now setting up shop in New York City. Now, for the people of Morristown, they suffer tremendously. They are very happy that the Army has left. Good riddance, get out of here. At least 90 people out of that 250 die of diseases. So that's almost half. About 67 of them from smallpox, 34 of them from dysentery. So they are very angry at George Washington and the Continental Army. You brought a plague and a pestilence on our home. And good riddance. So that nice comment before, That's going to change pretty quickly. And eventually the Army will be in central New Jersey. The British are trying to figure out what Washington's doing. They're trying to get Washington to fight. Washington's not really fighting. So what the British decide to do is get all their forces, sail down towards Elkton, Maryland, and march in our lovely direction. And they fight in the Philadelphia campaign of the fall of 1777. Brandywine, Germantown, Fort Mifflin, Fort Mercer, Battle of the Clouds, Paoli Massacre, and Washington's forces get their butts kicked for most of that. And now the British are a little bit more than 20 miles that way, in Philadelphia behind you folks, and Washington's army now, march, there we go, goes to this place, Valley Forge, visit the park. No, I'm just kidding. So, Valley Forge, December 19th of 1777 to June 19th of 78. It is the third winter encampment. So what I will say about this is please visit the park. If you have not visited the park, please, we're open. If you have visited the park already, come on back. But what I will say about this is three things. 2,000 soldiers die of diseases in this encampment. It's the highest death toll out of all the encampments I will talk about tonight because of the weather. It's not the snow everybody thinks happened at Valley Forge. I'll talk about that in a little bit. It's the rain and the mud and a little bit of the snow. You are damp, you cannot get dry, and so that's what helps spread typhus, pneumonia, dysentery, influenza, and a little bit of smallpox. That kills 2,000 of these folks. So that's the one thing to take away. Another thing to take away is the creation of the United States Army that we know today started at that place not too far from all of us today, and hopefully all of you online. And because of a volunteer. Every organization, we can't do it alone without volunteers. They are the glue that holds us together. And so one of those volunteers is Steuben, a German officer, drill master of this army. He comes as a volunteer, and he helps Washington train all of these different armies that are here, because again, people are coming and going, even though Washington's trying to shape and make this army better, they're doing different things. So Steuben finally gets permission by Washington, and Washington has the time. Everybody's going to march the same, use the bayonet, fire the musket the same way. Steuben writes all this down. The following year in Philadelphia, they print it on blue paper. The Blue Book that the United States Army uses elements of today, created because of Valley Forge. Third thing to keep in mind, they celebrate the French alliance in May, towards the tail end of this encampment. It becomes a global war. The French do not love democracy. They have a king worse than King George. They have an absolute monarchy, not a parliament monarchy. They want, as the French would love to say, revenge. Revenge. And so that's why the British hightail it out of Philadelphia. They have to send 5,000 of their 16,000-man army to reinforce Jamaica. So, and one island in the Caribbean is worth more to the British crown than Philadelphia ever will be. So those are kind of some things you should take away from this. The Army sends a very small force to reoccupy Philadelphia and see what the British did there or left there for us. And Washington's army marches through my home state of New Jersey, fights them 9 days later at the Battle of Monmouth on a very hot day to test what the Army has been doing for months at Valley Forge. And they do pretty well, but the war will continue. That's another theme of this evening. All right, there we go. I got it the right way this time. All right, so that leads us to encampment number 4 of this 8-year war. Again, they don't know that yet. We do. Middlebrook, New Jersey, November 30th, 1778 to June 3rd, 1779. I call it separating the army, and I'll explain why momentarily. Over 10,000 guys march into the Middlebrook encampment. The area was strong, defensible. The area was very friendly to the American cause, so that's a good thing. Barracks are being built, so we're talking about log huts, just like I showed you at Valley Forge, in early December, and by February, everyone is in some type of shelter. Now, with that being said, Washington moves into the building on the left-hand side there for you folks on Zoom. The John Wallace House in Somerville, New Jersey. You could visit it today. It is a state park run by the state of New Jersey. And by separating the Army, we will talk about the image on your right. Washington is now confident enough to start spreading out large detachments of his soldiers to contest areas in and around New York City from the British Army. He doesn't want to give the British Army too much land to roam around and have fun in. So he's going to send some of these guys not too far from Middlebrook, 15 miles north, so it's in New Jersey still, Buckingham, which is in Basking Ridge, New Jersey, and they build this apparatus here, this giant barracks for the artillery, all the cannons. 1,000 of his 10,000-man army go and build that structure and stay up there. Crane's, Lamb's, and Harrison's artillery regiments. So they are making munitions in that building. They are training with classrooms, just like all of you right now tonight. And they are practicing out in the open field. So they are getting better and better and better with this building that is built. Unfortunately, very few of the land that this is on is preserved today. The rest of it's been lost to suburbia today, for example. In addition to that, Washington sends about half of his army to Reading, Connecticut. And they will encamp up there near Danbury, Connecticut, which was a major supply depot and a hospital for the Army. Washington wanted to keep tabs on the British across the Long Island Sound and contesting the area of Westchester County. So that's why he sends up a good amount of forces there, and they continue to train, reorganize, occasionally skirmish with British forces as well. And the next image here, it's a little fuzzy, so I apologize for that. Couldn't really get a good resolution of it. This is the Middlebrook area, again from the New York Public Library, digital collections there. And if you're looking at the screen there, way over to the left on your screen, kind of where the river kind of bows up and then down, that's your Middlebrook area. The ridge line just above that there, that is the Watchung Mountains. So that's a bluff that Washington used 2 years before at Morristown. And the open space on the right-hand side, that's where I'm originally from, and that's the valley of central New Jersey. Okay, so that's the open area where farmland and forests are. And so again, he's using the river there, that's the Raritan River that goes into the Delaware Bay. I'm sorry, not the Delaware Bay, the Raritan Bay around New York City. And the Watchung Mountains, and again, he's protecting that area, but he's close enough still to keep an eye on the British in and around New York City. So again, he's using those locations for his benefit. And eventually that army will march out of Middlebrook and set up shop back in Morristown again, back for more. Now you might be asking, Russell, weren't the people very angry at Washington's army being there? Why would he go back? You're absolutely right. The army doesn't go back to Morristown proper. They encamp 4 miles southwest of the town in an area called Jockey Hollow, which you can visit today. It's run by the National Park Service. And so I called Morristown, New Jersey, the starving time and the hard winter. And there's a lovely quote there from Dr. James Thatcher. He's a surgeon. He's writing about this in January, so about a month in. No man can endure the storm's violence for many minutes without the danger of his life. Several marquees, so those are canvas tents for you folks, were torn asunder and blown over the officer's head. That's very dangerous, even today. And some soldiers were actually covered in their tents and buried like sheep under snow. So that's pretty apocalyptic, snowstorms and windstorms. And they're building large rows of huts. Again, very similar to Valley Forge. This is General Stark's brigade. Again, Erskine from Ringwood, New Jersey, drawing the fortifications for Washington, showing the encampment as well. Washington had about 10,000 guys again in this encampment. They build over 1,000 log huts. They cut miles and acres of forest for all of those huts and firewood, because they're going to need a lot of it because of that storm they talked about, or storms. Washington is going to stay not in Arnold's Tavern. It's too small for him. He's got a lot more staff at this time. The war has expanded, his responsibilities have expanded, so he needs a bigger building. It's the largest building in Morristown. You can visit it today. It's the Ford Mansion, run by the National Park Service. The very wealthy Ford family built that The husband passed away before he could actually live in the home, Jacob Ford. So now it's his widow, and their 2 young children. Theodora Ford and her family are going to live on one side of the house, and George Washington and his 50 staff are going to live in the rest of the building. The image above there is a drawing from the National Park Service. It's on a wayside somewhere at Morristown, showing the Morristown area, kind of a little blurry there off to the left, but showing kind of the Watchung Mountains. Again, they're on the left-hand side of the Watchung Mountains, and the British are far to the right. Again, he's using that ridgeline to protect his forces. Now, with that being said, Morristown is an important supply hub. Again, remember we talked about furnaces and forges to the north. He's got supply routes and roads that still go up that way to the Hudson Highlands. West Point, Fishkill, New York, Peekskill, New York, supply depots up there. And if you follow the roads from Morristown south, Princeton, Trenton, New Jersey, cross over and eventually go to Philadelphia where Congress is. So think of the Morristown area as the I-95 corridor of the day shifted westward. So again, it's an important supply depot and a communication line for the government and for the Army. So again, that's why he's going to be at Morristown. So now about the big freeze. So the big freeze in the hard winter on New Year's Day of 1780, 24 snowstorms hit this encampment, back to back to back. It rained, it snowed day and night. Temperatures hovered around the low 20s. The extreme wind chill made it even colder. Snowdrifts in this encampment were 6 feet tall. Snowdrifts. New York Harbor was frozen over with solid ice. It's never happened since. The British Navy couldn't get their warships out. Okay? 100-pound cannons and siege guns. The British moved them across the Hudson River because it was frozen with solid ice. To see how thick the ice was, to go to Staten Island and into New Jersey. That's how thick the ice was. Only 100 guys die in this encampment compared to Valley Forge with 2,000. Because they learned to get better. Not perfect. They suffered tremendously at this encampment. I don't want to knock them for that experience. They're eating shoe leather and tree bark. That's how bad it is. Roads are impassable for weeks. So they had a crisis on their hands. And what the British were scheming was to end the war with these snowstorms. So in January, end of January 1780, a British general named William von Kniphausen, he's a German officer in the British forces, he has an idea to capture George Washington and end the war. He's going to order John Gray Simcoe's and the Queen Anne's Rangers, these are guys on horses for you, to cross the ice, which they can do, and go to Morristown, and go to that building, the Ford Mansion, and capture George Washington. Because remember, Washington's main army of 10,000 guys are 4 miles southwest. They are nowhere near Washington's headquarters. Washington has about 50 guys. The Queen Anne's Rangers can easily gather up 200, 300 guys. They can overwhelm Washington's forces and bring them back, and the war could be over before those soldiers 4 miles south of them would find out what's going on. So they cross over the Arthur Kill into Woodbridge, New Jersey on February 11th. However, the operation falls apart very quickly for the British. They start running into Continental sentries that have been sent out to guard certain roads, to protect areas, to keep an eye on the British that Washington is always doing. And there's a skirmish, and the British try to flank them, and they run into more forces, and they get bogged down in that snow. That same snow that was affecting the British Navy and Washington's army at Morristown, it's affecting these guys trying to ride horses and march in the snow. It's too much for them. They get within about 20 miles of Morristown, so near Woodbridge, and there's another detachment that's sent up to Hackensack, New Jersey. And eventually, the British say, ooh, it's now end of February, it's getting into early March, guess what's happening with the ice in New York Harbor? It's starting to melt. And if they keep trying to press this, the ice will melt, and now they're going to be trapped, and they might be prisoners of war. So they have to skedaddle, and they go back to New York City. So that is the attempt to capture George Washington during the American Revolution at the Morristown Encampment. And the Army survives the winter, and they continue to grow and move on to our, if you're keeping score, our 6th winter encampment for you, New Windsor, New York, on the Hudson Highlands, November 10th, 1780 to May 18th, 1781. Washington will stay in the Ellis House in New Windsor, and this is a map here on your right-hand side. Apologize if it's a little small to read right now. It's from the French Army, French engineers, showing Kings Ferry and Stony Point and the Hudson River and a lot of bluffs nearby and fortifications that the Army builds to protect them along the Hudson River. So again, they are fortifying the Hudson River. They are using the river crossings to communicate back and forth and trying to prevent the British from sailing up southwards from New York City up towards West Point, in other words. So what Washington is going to do, again, he's guarding all these river crossings in this communication line. He's protecting supplies there, and he's doing 3 other things. And you might be familiar with at least one of them. He's keeping his army intact. If he can outlast the British, hopefully the war will be over. It hasn't happened yet, but he's hoping. He's also sending men and material piecemeal, not all at once, because he can't afford it, down to the south. So what is happening on the American Revolution timeline for you folks is the British have been successfully able to capture Savannah, Charleston, South Carolina, and British forces are moving through North Carolina, going into Virginia. That's what the British are doing, while there's a large British force in and around New York City still. That's their main base, New York City. And so Washington has to send reinforcements because his armies, he had 2 armies, 2 southern armies, that got destroyed. One under Benjamin Lincoln and one under Horatio Gates. So now he's got a new army, army number 3 for the South under Nathaniel Greene. And so Nathaniel Greene needs reinforcements. Washington is trying to do that the best he can. And in addition to that, Washington is waiting very patiently, like all of you are right now, for French military aid. Remember, France has declared war on England. It's the French alliance we celebrated. Well, where are they? And so the French are actually in Newport, Rhode Island for the winter. And Washington is desperately waiting for them to come out of Newport, join him in the Hudson Highlands, so they can march southward and attack New York City. He wants their navy, and he wants their forces, because they are professional soldiers. Just as Washington is trying with his soldiers, but they're really professional as well. But I also refer to this New Windsor encampment, danger and new hope. So what do I mean by danger? Early on in this encampment, there is a big crisis that Washington has to deal with. That is the Pennsylvania Line Mutiny. The Pennsylvania soldiers actually are not in the Hudson Highlands. They are in Morristown, New Jersey again, at the Jockey Hollow area, south of the town. They're in the same huts that they were in the year before, new recruits, etc., etc. And throughout the Revolutionary War, the soldiers are not getting paid, not getting the proper clothing, and not getting the proper food that they deserve and are supposed to get. And so the soldiers are fed up. They're not going to take it anymore, and there's a riot. An officer is killed trying to say, oh, no, calm down, calm down. And Anthony Wayne, from Waynesboro, a local boy not too far from us here in Phoenixville, that's where he's originally from, is in charge of those guys. And he is writing to George Washington about what is going on in New Windsor, New York. And Washington is furious about this. These are supposed to be professional soldiers. That is an angry mob, a rabble. And so what Washington has to do is he has to send reinforcements from New Windsor to help Anthony Wayne prevent these guys from wreaking havoc. And these mutineers have a goal. They are going to the capital, which is Philadelphia. Hold Congress hostage for better pay, food rations, things like that. The British want to know what's going on. Anthony Wayne and Washington are trying to prevent the British from finding out, because if the British find out, they can try to convince all these guys to join us, because we'll give you pay, we'll give you rank, we'll give you all that, and now Washington will have another army in his rear to try to defeat. So there's this chase that is happening. And the mutineers get to Princeton, New Jersey. That is the state capital of New Jersey at the time period. And they go to a lovely building called Nassau Hall. And you can visit it today. It's on the campus of Princeton. And that's where the state government is. And guess what they do? They capture some of the state government. And now there's a hostage negotiation going on between Anthony Wayne, some of these soldiers from New Windsor, New York, his officers, and another gentleman who's important, Joseph Reed. He was an aide-de-camp to George Washington. Think of it as a secretary in the beginning of the war. He was a member of Congress. Now he is the president of Pennsylvania. That's the governor of Pennsylvania. So he goes there because, again, Princeton, getting pretty close to us in Pennsylvania. And so they do that negotiation with these mutineers. And what they decide to come up with, and the soldiers agree to this, is anyone who has served for 3 years in the Army, you are discharged. Thank you for your service. Goodbye. We appreciate you taking time out of your day to do that. Everybody else who signed up for the duration of the war gets to go on furlough. Forced vacation. Go away, see you later, come back in the spring, cool off, and we'll see you then. Hopefully they'll get supplies and all that, but who knows. At least one of the ringleaders is executed for this whole scheme that happens. And Washington crushes this before the British really try to get those soldiers to join them. So that's the danger. As the encampment drags on, April of '81, Washington is writing to members of Congress saying, we are at the end of our tether. It is now or never that deliverance must come. And he's referring to French aid. Because remember, French alliance, that was in May of 1778. This is 1781. Where are they? And the French have finally moved out of Newport, Rhode Island, and they are marching through Connecticut, and Washington finally gets to meet them around Worcester, Connecticut, and he meets Rochambeau, the commander of the French forces. And Rochambeau agrees with Washington to probe the British lines in and around New York City to the north, on the North River, to see how strong they are. Maybe we can take them out with our forces, without our navy. And so they call it the Grand Reconnaissance. This happens in July, so the encampment is kind of over in New Windsor, but they're still in the area. And however, the British are too well dug in, and there's too many of them. So the French are like, no, we're not attacking. This will be a slaughter. We're not going to sacrifice your lives. But Washington is desperate. He wants New York City back. He's lost it in the second year of the war. He wants it back. That is something that is just eating at his soul that he wants. While that's happening, remember this is a war that's expanded all over the place, the French Navy is down in the Chesapeake area of Virginia, and they are bottling up, pretty successfully, a British army that was marching through North Carolina and down to Virginia. And they are lobbying heavily. The French officers, Washington's staff, Washington's generals saying, attack those forces down in Virginia. Forget this New York thing. And Washington is wishy-washy. He's going back, well, I don't know, this might not work, I don't know. And eventually Washington agrees to that idea. And so what the French and the American forces do is they cross the King's Ferry, across the Hudson River, to the west, and they start to make their way down to a little place called Yorktown, Virginia, that you might be familiar with. And the war will continue. And that will lead us to our 7th winter encampment for you folks, keeping tabs. And that is the Newburgh, New York encampment, November 26, 1781 to March 22nd of 82. And the Army is marching back up from Virginia. Let's see, how do they do? They did pretty well, actually. They have reason to celebrate. In October, a month before, of 81, the Continental Army, with the help of the French Army and the French Navy, have captured 6,000 British soldiers under Lord Cornwallis at Yorktown. This surrender jolts the British government. It leads to the resignation of Prime Minister Lord North, and it pushes for a negotiated peace treaty that is slowly being worked on in Paris, France, with Ben Franklin and some of our other ambassadors. So this is the big deal that is happening in this encampment as they're getting there. Washington is hoping, again, for those French forces that helped at Yorktown to march back up and join him in Newburgh, New York. The French are in Williamsburg, Virginia for their encampment in the wintertime. Because Washington wants to use those soldiers who were pretty successful against that British Army to attack New York City again. Remember, he wants it bad because he is very fearful that the French Army is going to go somewhere else. Maybe to the Caribbean, maybe go to Gibraltar, maybe go invade England, maybe go to India or the Gulf Coast, because this is a global war that has expanded to all over the place. So what Washington does is he does a lot of this, a lot of hand-wringing, okay? He's trying to entice the French officers, the French government, anyone who has power in the French Army and Navy, to join him up in the Hudson Highlands around Newburgh, New York, and attack New York City. So what does he do? He does a big birthday bash. They build this beautiful awning during the encampments, because in May, they get word, that, so this is after the encampment is officially over, but they're still in the area, that the King of France has a baby boy. Louis Josephine the Dauphin, the heir to the French crown. So again, let's do a birthday party for the newborn baby. Please join us, France. We love you. We love your government. Join us, join us, join us. And eventually, the French army moved out of Williamsburg. That's September, by the way. So it's months after Washington waiting around, and now he's just south of there, just waiting like you are right now. And Rochambeau and his army marches up to the Newburgh area. They see Washington's army, they've been training for months and months and months, and they collectively have about 12,000 guys. And Rochambeau has little interest in attacking New York City. Nah, I don't want to do it. And the following month, the French go to Boston, get on boats, and they go down the Caribbean, because Jamaica is worth more to the French than New York City ever will be. And Washington is heartbroken. Again, another opportunity to use the French, and they're not interested. And that leads us to our final encampment, or cantonment. Number 8, New Windsor, New York, October 1st, 1782 to April 19th of 83. I also call it breaking apart and recognition. And you can see again the image on your left there for you folks on Zoom and folks in the audience here. Again, those nice rows of huts. Again, the Army is professionalized. They're better at building huts now. Same thing with the image on your right there. Again, nice rows of huts in the encampment. So breaking apart. One of Washington's crises that he has to deal with happens towards the end of his time in New Windsor, New York. It is the Newburgh conspiracy. It happens in Newburgh, New York, only 2 miles away. Again, they're using a lot of these areas kind of interchangeably at this time. And it takes place in this building. So your image on your right, it's going to be the top little log structure on the left. It is called the Temple of Virtue. You could visit it today. It's a reconstruction. The original building doesn't exist anymore, but the state of New York, it is a state park, reconstructed that structure. So think of it as a church, mess hall, and a meeting space. That's what it is. And as the war drags on, local governments, state governments, and Continental Congress have lost interest in supplying George Washington's army. The war is over. The British have now evacuated Charleston and Savannah. Yes, the British Army is still in New York City, but there's this negotiation that is going on with Ben Franklin and John Adams and other folks. So we think it's over. And so we don't really care about this army. But these are soldiers. These are people. And they're suffering. They're not getting paid. And they have bills to pay. They're not getting food. They got to eat. And they need clothes because it's cold out. And so what is happening is there's this large meeting that is going on in this in the encampment. On March 10th, there's a letter that is circulating that Washington gets his hands on, decrying the Army's condition and lack of congressional support. And it is very vitriol to Congress. And there's this large meeting with officers, and he's getting word that these officers and generals are scheming to take over the government. Maybe appoint one of them in charge. Maybe appoint George Washington in charge. Go to Philadelphia, march on the Capitol, take it over, and then we'll get our pay, we'll get our land, and we'll get the respect that they deserve, or we deserve, quote unquote. And so Washington is furious at this. Again, you are a rabble, you're a mob, you're not professional soldiers. So he asks all of these people who are in charge of this meeting, like Horatio Gates, a general, can I come to this meeting? And all these generals are like, yes, Washington is on our side. And Washington goes there, and he's very angry, and he's not showing it that much. He's very reserved. Keep that in mind, he's very reserved. And he's producing a letter from a member of Congress named Joseph Jones. It's a bland letter. It's explaining, yes, we understand your plight of the Army. We are trying to the best that we can to get you all those supplies and pay that you deserve. And Washington's fumbling and he's straining, trying to read this letter in front of all of these folks. Now, we don't know if he scripted this or he did this right then and there. He says, "Gentlemen, if you will permit me to put on my spectacles, for I have not only gone gray, but almost blind to the service of my country." So that temperature in that room drops dramatically. All of those officers and generals realize in that one moment, Washington has sacrificed just as much as they have. And again, very few people have seen Washington with glasses. He's starting to lose his eyesight. Unfortunately, that's what happens when people get older. And so, only very few have seen that, but a lot of them haven't. So they're shocked at that display. That stress of the job is aging Washington. Washington is allowed, he says, okay, and then he leaves, and they immediately start crafting a letter. Henry Knox and others produce a statement pledging, as I'm going to read this here, unshaken confidence in justice to Congress and their country. So that whole scheme of putting someone that went in charge, like George Washington or whoever, just fizzles out. Washington gets word about this letter, sends all of his notes to Congress, and he's going, hey, it's getting really bad over here, you better get your act together. And because of all of that, it pressures Congress to act. And what Congress does is they pass a 5-year full pay pension for all the officers and generals in the Army. That's nice. What about the soldiers? What about the people who make up most of that pyramid? Oh, they're still going to grumble. They're still going to riot. They're still going to misbehave because they are not getting all of that respect that they deserve. When the Army is officially disbanded in November of '83, when Washington is able to recapture New York City as the British evacuate, he has very few soldiers to do that in this display that he tries to put on. Congress will pay some money and back pay to these soldiers. It will take many years and different presidents of our country to pass bills for Revolutionary War veterans, to pass the first pensions for federal service. And a lot of them, unfortunately, will not get that. A lot of them will pass away years before they get it. And a lot of them are in their 80s and 90s when they can get it. So, other things that are going on for recognition are happening in this encampment. The Badge of Military Merit is created. It's actually created in August of '82, so before New Windsor encampment, but they're actually giving it out in this encampment and afterwards. So this is going to be used for soldiers who have exhibited unusual gallantry in battle, also extraordinary and essential service to their country. They are allowed to permit to wear on the facings on their left breast a figure of a Purple Heart in a cloth. And you can see an original one right there on the right-hand side. And they have these on they have this one on display in New York at that state park I mentioned before. Only 3 people are going to get this, though. Sergeant William Brown of the 5th Connecticut Regiment, Sergeant Elijah Church of the 2nd Regiment of Light Dragoons, guys on horses, Daniel Bredson of the 2nd Connecticut Regiment. The Badge of Military Merit will completely disappear after the American Revolution. No, we don't want it anymore. It is not revived until 1932 under President Herbert Hoover, where he reinstates it for wounded and killed soldiers in the line of service, aka the Purple Heart, created during the American Revolution. Another thing for recognition, the Society or Order of Cincinnati. There it is. And you can see that beautiful medal. This is founded by generals and officers. Henry Knox, Steuben, Alexander Hamilton in Newburgh, New York. Again, not too far from New Windsor. And this society had numerous goals. Continue the memory of the American Revolution to make sure we don't forget. Also, maintain the fraternal bond between the officers to make sure, this camaraderie doesn't fall apart. Also, advocate for those officers and their families to make sure they get the compensation that they deserve from Congress and the government. The Society of Cincinnati is still around today. There are members of that organization. I believe they trace their lineage to some of these officers and generals. The other aspect of this organization is they are an advocacy group of the American Revolution for historical sites around our country and research and topics, and they have a beautiful library in Washington, D.C. that you could visit, and a museum as well. So they are still around today. So, as you have seen, several winter encampments, not including Valley Forge, played an important role in the American Revolution. Each of these encampments was a place to regroup, train, strategize the next moves of the Army. Suffering did occur due to disease, fighting, mutinies, but there were celebrations of new hope, and the future emerged each time the Army survived the winter. These are the encampments that saved the American Revolution. I want to thank you for your time, but before we go to questions, I just want to briefly show you, I did not make this up. I had other people do it. No, I was kidding. So these are some of the resources that I used for each of the encampments. Some of these you can find at your local library. Some of these you can find online. So for Cambridge, Pax Americana, if you're interested in the smallpox epidemic that spreads throughout the American Revolution. Surviving the Winter by Steve Elliott. I actually worked with this guy when I was a volunteer at Morristown back in the day. He wrote a book about this topic, and I kind of expanded upon it a little bit. YouTube videos and historical research from Cambridge, from Washington's headquarters, that you can look up to get more nuances of what Washington was doing during that time up there. Morristown, my old stomping grounds. Uncertain Revolution, about the Morristown encampment. Historical archaeology of the Revolutionary War encampment. There are lovely chapters, thank you, about the American Revolution. Again, some of these you're going to see again, Steve Elliott again. Morristown has an official handbook. Unfortunately, we don't have Valley Forge that they put that together in '83. That has a lot of good information about both of their encampments. And then some YouTube videos that they put together as well. Middlebrook, New Jersey. There is a book about Middlebrook itself. Again, Steve Elliott there. Camp Redding, because remember they were dividing up their forces. Archaeological digs were done there. That is a small state park that I wish I visited. I drove past the sign a couple years ago and I was like, oh, we should have went there. Some other ones, American Eagle Nest there. Some archaeological research as well put together. Morristown, again, this is the second Morristown encampment. Again, similar things. Quartering and supplying the Army. The U.S. Department of Interior Studies, Park Service Studies. Again, historical research by the staff at Morristown that I know there. New Windsor, New York. Washington's Last Cantonment, High Time for Peace. That was a really good one. It helped me really kind of dive into a timeline of that. Rebellion in the Ranks. Excellent book about people misbehaving in the Continental Army, which happens a lot. For you. The Washington Rochambeau Trail. Our site manager works under Valley Forge, but the trail does not go through Valley Forge. It goes through Indy, Independence Hall in Philadelphia. But they have a good research too, related to the French marching in that area as well. All right, Newburgh, New York again. River on the Rock, history of the fortifications of West Point and that area. Again, remember, they're building up all of those fortifications that are still around today. Douglas Freeman's George Washington, talking about George Washington towards the tail end of the encampment, dealing with all these crises, because there are plenty. And then there should be one more. Again, American Crisis, River on the Rock. Masquerade, The Life and Times of Deborah Sampson. She is a woman dressed as masquerading as a man in the Continental Army, and she is at that encampment and talking about what she does as one of Washington's soldiers, kind of foraging for food and keeping an eye on the British in and around Westchester County, just south of where the Army is there for you. All right, and now scene. Okay, so I am ready for questions. There it is. Questions, concerns, complaints. Yes, ma'am, here in the audience.
You said like 2,000 people died at Valley Forge. Do you know where they're buried?
Great question. So for the audience online, the question was, there are 2,000 soldiers that died at Valley Forge. Where are they buried? We get that question a lot. They are not buried at the park that we are aware of. So, what happens is, if you are sick, Washington is ordering you to leave the encampments. Because if you get sick, everybody else in that hut gets sick, and now there's no army. However, human nature, and you're going to know what I'm going to say. There are plenty of people that we know in our lives. I don't need a doctor, I'm perfectly fine. Cough, 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 cough. Please, for the love of God or whatever, go see a doctor. There will be people who will suffer in silence. There will be people who will die in the middle of the night. So my coworker, Steve Walter, has done a lot of primary account research, looking at first-hand accounts, digitizing them, transcribing them, which is a work of love and art, and putting them all together in these large Word documents that are pages and pages and pages long, and dividing them up because Word doesn't even want to open them up. That's how many there are. He's found references of a mass grave. What does mass grave mean? 10 people, 20 people, 30 people, 2,000? We have no idea. Southeast of the park. That is where the mall is, the casino, the Top Golf, 422, Turnpike, all that. That was farmland. So some of those people, not the 2,000 total, but some of those people were buried outside of the encampment. Okay? But they've been lost to time. So we don't know how many. Now for most of those guys, you're going as far away as Bethlehem, Lidditz, Ephrata, Reading, places like that, into hospitals out there. Some of them come back, a whole bunch don't come back. And those guys are buried out in those local cemeteries that you can visit today. There are graves, little old cemeteries that say Revolutionary War soldiers died during the Philadelphia campaign or at Valley Forge. 50 guys, 200 guys here. So that's how you get close to that 2,000 number for you. I hope that answered that question for you. You're welcome. Yes, ma'am, in the front here.
So those soldiers are buried in those different places because that's where they came from? They went back home? No, they just,
So the
where
question,
they landed.
So the question is for the folks online is, so those soldiers, are they buried near where they're from? No. Those soldiers are just going to those hospitals because they're close by.
And that's where they
And that's where they go, yeah. So if you're from North Carolina and you die in the encampment, you might be buried out in Reading. Because at the time period, you know, people didn't have the means to go travel to faraway lands or
Right.
different states as easily as we do today, and as easily as they did in the 1900s or the 1800s compared to the American Revolution. And there's going to be very few instances of families coming up to those places and exhuming their bodies and bringing them back home to be buried.
So they were just trying to get to hospital sites or some
Yes.
sort of
Yes,
medical.
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. The Civil War is when you're really going to start to
Yeah.
see that, where they have the infrastructure with the railroad, with more roads, things like that, to do that, to bury those people near where they fought or those hospitals, and then their families months later getting word from the government
Right.
saying, sorry, they passed away, and then they might go and get them or they might not. In the American Revolution, that does not happen at all, to my knowledge.
Right.
Sir in the back.
I know that people don't like to attack in the winter,
Mhm.
and the British were having a great time in Philadelphia.
Mhm.
But if they had attacked out, weren't they very vulnerable with that many people sick? And not just ones who died, but the ones who were under the weather and everything? And they were, what, 15, 20 miles away? Did they ever consider that? Or what would have happened if, was that possible for them to do that?
Great question. So, the question is for the folks online, since Washington's army is weak and all these people are dying at the encampment, and the British are not too far away, 20 miles, why don't they attack here at Valley Forge? Well, there was a couple reasons for that. The weather. The weather plays a factor in that. Both armies are exhausted from the Philadelphia campaign. They marched over 200 miles. They have supply issues just as George Washington does. Not as bad, but they do. The British commander is William Howe at this time. Remember he attacked Bunker Hill? Lost half of you in that battle? The Americans at Valley Forge dig in fortifications on a bluff. So if they attack, it will be a disaster. Now, however, what I was trying to find here, which I don't think I have one, and I don't have it in my PowerPoint, is we have, here at the park, have rediscovered anywhere between 90 to 110 skirmishes. During the 6 months Washington is here at Valley Forge and the British are in Philadelphia, fighting for food, supplies, and keeping an eye on each other. So some of them are Radnor, near University of Villanova, or Barron Hill, near Conshohocken, or Darby, near the Philadelphia airport, for example. 50 guys here, 20 guys here, 200 guys here, and 3 guys don't come back. That's what we're talking about. So the war never stops, as a coworker of mine would say. So the war does happen. The British know about Washington here, but both sides are not strong enough to attack each other's fortifications. They
It would
want
have been
to.
disastrous for them then, for the British?
Yeah.
Okay,
Mhm.
thank you.
Yep, absolutely. So I hope that helps.
So they would just run into each other forging, like
Mhm. Yep.
come upon each other.
Come upon
and-
each other, and they're not going to go and shake each other's hand and go,
Yeah.
"How's your winter encampment going, my friend?" No, they're going to start taking pot shots at
No,
each
that's
other.
my chicken.
Yeah, exactly, because the British are desperate for supplies too. Remember, the British Army gets most of their supplies 3,000 miles away. Washington and the Continental Army get most of their supplies 50 miles away. So that's a big problem the British Army has to deal with throughout the Revolutionary War. Absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
I heard that the reduction like in mortality and sicknesses at Morristown the second time,
Yes.
second count
Yes.
was due to like a redesign of the encampment, and because like the way they had figured out that like if the water, like that they had to put the outhouses on the bottom instead of the top so that the water wasn't, affected.
Great question.
Did you find that to be true, that it was a design that helped reduce the sickness and dysentery?
Absolutely. So the question for the people on Zoom, the young lady in the back was asking about the layout of the encampment at the second Morristown encampment, how they learned and did they get better and disease. There wasn't that many people dying. Yeah, there was only, I think, 100 people died in that encampment, because at that Morristown encampment, they're encamping on Mount Kimball. I'm putting that in quotes there, folks, because if you're from Colorado or you've been to California, they got the mountains. These are anthills. Anyway, so they're encamping on a hill. Where are they putting those latrines, as you pointed out, ma'am? At the tail end of the encampment or outside of the encampment. So if they do overflow, which they will do because the soldiers are supposed to cover them up every couple days or dig new ones, sometimes they're not doing that, they'll run out of the encampment, not in the encampment. So if you've been to our lovely park at Valley Forge National Historical Park, it's a bowl, okay? And the ridge line that kind of skirts the edges of the park that you can drive around and enjoy the scenery, that's where the huts were. In the valley, in the bowl there, that's where those latrines were because they're behind the huts. And guess where the soldiers are marching and drilling in? That bowl. And they're not digging new ones all the time. And it's overflowing, so they're marching in it. And so that's what leads to that dysentery, that typhus that killed 2,000 guys. But at Morristown, they learned, don't do that. That's a dumb idea. And they have them run out of the encampment. And other encampments will do the same thing. Absolutely. So disease, due to those things and sloppy mistakes, will go down. But disease will still kill more soldiers than wounds in battle up until World War I. Yes, sir, in the back.
You mentioned that Newburgh and the other New York encampment
Mm-hmm.
were
New Windsor?
New Windsor were 2 miles apart.
Yeah.
Why do they go back and forth between, New Windsor to Newburgh to New Windsor?
Absolutely. So the question is, since New Windsor and Newburgh are so close to each other, why didn't they just pick one and stay there? Why did they go kind of back and forth? Well, because you got 10,000 people, it's an ecological disaster, they're trampling all over the grounds, they're cutting down all these trees, so they're using that area, devastating it, and then they're moving to a better area that can provide for them, because they need new firewood, they need new lumber for huts, so they're going to go close, but not exactly there, to go to areas where they can get those resources, and then they'll go back when the area is starting to rejuvenate again. So that's why they kind of do that back and forth.
And was Washington at the Hasbrook house the whole time?
He was
Most of the time?
there, sure. So he was at the Hasbrook house. Let me get that real quick here. I have my actual notes here. Let's see. He stays there for, he stays at that building for those 2 years. He does stay in Newburgh, even though the Army's at New Windsor. So yes, he does stay there for those 2 years because it's a good location, even though most of his Army's at New Windsor, so I consider it the New Windsor Cantonment instead of the Newburgh, type times 2. So absolutely right on that point. Yes, sir. Anyone else have questions in the audience before we go online? Yes, ma'am.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Why was Jamaica so important to the British and the French?
Ah, great question. So the young lady in the front here asked, why is Jamaica so important to the British and or the French? It's because of sugar.
Yeah,
The
profit.
sugar, the profit. That's the gold or the oil of the day, That's what they're making their fortune on, these sugar islands. Absolutely.
And slaves.
And yes, but on the backs of enslaved people. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely.
Anyone on Zoom with a question? Here's your chance to unmute. Anyone? Okay. Well, Russell, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you,
Being here.
Mark.
It was great.
Thank you. Thank you folks on Zoom. Thank you folks from the audience. I hope I answered all your questions. If you have more, I can hang around for a couple more minutes before Mark politely kicks me out of the library.